Some watches measure time, some watches protect time, but there are a handful of watches that change how we think about time. Not as something abstract, but as something lived, worn, and lived with through decades of culture and context. The Reverso is one of those watches. And the Reverso, a living legend, a book by Manfred Fritz, is not just history of a watch. It's a chronicle of an idea that became timeless. Today, we are exploring why this single model history became one of the most important watch books ever written, and what it tells us about design, identity, and why some objects become legends. Now, unlike most contemporary coffee table books about watches, Reverso, the living legend, was written in 1992, decades before the boom in watch publishing. Its author, Manfred Fritz, was a horological historian with a passion for treating iconic models with depth, usually reserved for entire brands. At roughly 340 pages with hundreds of illustrations and photographs, it was one of the first books dedicated to a single wristwatch, making it a touchstone for serious collectors. That was unusual at the time. Most books were brand overviews or technical manuals. Fritz's volume treated the Reverso as a cultural artifact worthy of deep study beyond specs and numbers. This is not a catalog. This is not brand pamphlet. Reverso, the living legend, is a monograph, a single subject book devoted entirely to the Jaeger LeCoultre Reverso and its first 60 years of history from 1931 to 1991. It combines narrative history, rich photography and illustrations, archival material, technical context, design discussion, all centered on one model that has remained in continuous or near continuous cultural relevance for decades. The Reverso's beginning is essential to this book's narrative. Designed in 1931 for British Army officers in India who needed a watch that could survive the shocks of polo match, the Reverso defined the feature, a reversible case that flips to protect the dial, was a tour de force to functional elegance. What Fritz's book does particularly well is tie this practical origin, if you may, to broader cultural and design currents of the time. Not just what the watch was, but why it made sense in a shifting world where wristwatches were becoming symbols of modern identity. The book proceeds roughly chronologically, but its pulse is thematic. Origins and design logic, how and why the Reverso was created. Then early adoption and evolution, how the watch adapted to changing times. Technical innovation and design versatility, from simple dual faces to complex variations. And then cultural relevance, how owners and movements gave the Reverso social meaning. Fritz doesn't just describe the watch, he connects it to the people, to the places, and moments that made it matter. This is why the book isn't just for collectors, it is for thinkers as well. One of the key insights of the book is that the Reverso design wasn't just functional. The rectangular case became a visual manifesto, a geometry that stood apart from round competition around. The flip mechanism transformed utilitarian logic into expressive possibility. The blank reverse surface became a canvas for personalization with inscriptions, engravings, and later artisan decoration. In Fritz's telling, the Reverso is a nearly architectural a watch shaped as much by ideas as by mechanics. This is where the book intersects with watches and politics. Fritz situates the Reverso across era, the Great Depression, World War II, post-war recovery, and the cultural rejuvenation of the late 20th century. Through these transitions, the Reverso survived dominance of round watches. It outlived shifts from purely functional to symbolic fashion. It became a luxury object while preserving its functional origins. That is significance for a Reverso. Because objects that endure don't just survive design cycles. They absorb meaning from the moments they traverse. That's a kind of soft power watches as cultural witnesses as much as timekeepers. When Reverso, the Living Legend, was published, model-specific books were rare. It helped establish a new way of writing about watches. Not as specs and serial numbers, not as dry production data, but as narratives with characters, context, and consequences. It became a precedent, a touchstone for later horological monographs that treat watches as texts to be read, not as objects to be classified or to be collected. Here's what makes the Reverso story sticky. It began as a solution to a mechanical problem, but it ended up defining a design language. Rectangular geometry, and then reversible identity, and then Art Deco resonance. Continued with personalization as expression, and that's not just good design, that's visual politics, where an object influences taste, identity, and social meaning without a single manifest. So, what is Reverso, the Living Legend, really? It's not a watch book, it's a design history, but it's also a cultural artifact. It's a story about how form and meaning intertwine. And now I want to hear from you. What design stories do you see in the watches that you wear yourself? Do you think a watch can shape identity beyond its function? And which other watch deserve a living legend book like this Reverso manuscript? Well, drop me a comment or send me a message and tell me what we should explore next here. This is Watches and Politics, so don't forget to subscribe, to share this with a collector who thinks that watches are stories and watch collectors are storytellers. And then I'll see you in the next chapter.